Hi, welcome to More Christ. Today I'm joined by Gregory Koukl. Greg is a Christian apologist, a radio talk show host, an author, speaker, and the founder of the Christian apologetics organization Stand to Reason. Just to begin then today, Greg, could you tell us please a little bit about your background and some of the key events in your life that have helped to form you and your love for Christ and his church?
Yeah, sure. And by the way, I just want to say I wish I were in Ireland with you instead of here in Southern California at the moment, because that's
Yeah.
just sounds so romantic, Ireland, not been there, but God willing, I'll have an opportunity. Maybe I'll bring my daughter, my redheaded 16-year-old daughter. I became a Christian almost 48 years ago, Mark, and I was a 23-year-old student at UCLA. And up until that time, though I had some Christian upbringing, so to speak. In other words, I had a church life as a young person with my family. When we all grew up, kids, everybody, including my parents, moved on. This was the mid 60s. And so I was embracing all kinds of crazy philosophies that were popular then and sounded good to a 18, 19, 20-year-old guy. And when you're that age, you don't want to be thinking about religion and God and purity and all of that kind of stuff. This is inconvenient, right? And so as I look now back on it, I would say mindlessly embraced all these ideas. And it wasn't until 1973, through the impact of my brother, who had become a Christian in the Jesus movement, that I began to reconsider Christ, kind of without all the religious trapping that I had been raised with. And not only the fact of my sin, and therefore the judgment that was hanging over my head, as a matter of fact, but also the fact and the reality of God's grace, that there was forgiveness. There's a verse I love that I want to have on my tombstone. It's Psalm, I think it's 135, verse 3 or 4, somewhere in there. And the verse says, Lord, if you should mark iniquity, in other words, if you're keeping score, Lord, oh Lord, who could stand? Oh Lord, who could stand? And think about that sometimes when I'm, thinking about, maybe I'm not good enough. Well, the answer is, of course, you're not good enough. Nobody's good enough. Even the most righteous person, if God is keeping track of iniquities, no one would stand. The next verse says, but there is forgiveness in you that you might be praised. I love that. I love that. So what that communicates is the grace of God, and that was the transforming feature of my life. And I have to admit, I guess, that this more than anything drives my life now. The grace of God, the mercy of God towards sinners, and it's not that. I am no more righteous than the next person. People assume things about those Christians who are in have a lot of visibility, and maybe God's using in unique ways, and they respect them and look up to them, which is fine. But I don't want people to think in a wrong way. I'm just another human being, I'm just as big a sinner as you are, Mark, and anybody else who's listening, And it's the grace of God that sustains me and that I turn to all the time. And that's why the gospel is good news. Okay, so now you're getting a feel then, the kind of thing that began to transform my life as a new believer. And of course, I wanted to communicate with other people. And I began on the streets of Westwood Village, which is the town where UCLA is at, and it's very upscale, very hip. Certainly back in the early 70s, we used to call it hip back then. I don't know the words anymore now, but it was totally cool. It was awesome. It was I don't know, maybe that's even dated, but you get the picture. So where all the beautiful people would go on Saturday night and Friday night and walk and go to eat and all this. So I'm out there talking to people about my own convictions. It was just automatic. Lots of people out there peddling religion at that time, and so I just was walking down the road and I get talking to people. And that's when I realized I need to know more. This is where apologetics began to enter my life. I need to have answers. And I also, very early in my Christian life, I moved into what was really a Christian community. I mean, you might have called it a commune back then, but that has other connotations to it. It was a Christian community in Westwood Village, and there were about 120 of us that were in this community, and a good number of us lived in this old fraternity house, and they had separations for men and women, and there's common meeting areas, and we all were studying Christianity together in an informal though vigorous way. That is, it wasn't a accredited school or anything, but that's where I got discipled. And I moved into that community 4 months old as a Christian, and within a couple months I had developed a relationship with one of the trainers there. His name was Craig, and he took me under his wing, and for 2.5 years we had a very intimate, day by day kind of personal discipleship, and that is what made all the difference for me, Mark. And it set the trajectory for my Christian life, and it also put discipleship as in my DNA. It's what I do, it's what I'm about. And I realize even now what I'm doing is I'm doing my best to mentor you and the people who are watching the show, passing something on, passing the baton in some fashion, even though we're not in a face-to-face personal relationship, though I have been with lots of people in my own group. So that's, maybe you were asking what drives my love for Christ. It's the grace of God. What drives my concern or interest or love for the church? It's discipleship. And those are really foundational things in everything that I do, and of course deeply inform the work that I do at Stand to Reason.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you, Greg. And then building on that, how is that manifest in your work in apologetics and those central concerns that we see even in your written work, some of which we might speak about today? So say tactics and story of reality, how does that play out then?
Well, maybe the best way to explain this is to describe a model that Stand to Reason is built on. Now, we have a mission, we have a vision. And so the mission says, here's our activity. Our vision is the particular things that we're trying to accomplish. But there's an overarching purpose. And the way that we characterize that at Stand to Reason is that we want to create a certain type of person that we call an ambassador. Okay, a lot of times engagements between Christians and non-Christians look more like D-Day than diplomacy, right? And we want that to be reversed. We want to see diplomacy, not D-Day. We want to see a gentle, diplomatic kind of engagement with non-Christians. And so this is what we are trying to build the Christian for. Notice that we are building the Christian. That's the first few words of our mission statement. We train Christians. So we're not evangelistic. That's not our goal. We're not an evangelistic organization. We are an organization that is discipleship oriented, though we don't use that language a lot, but this is what it amounts to. I don't use it a lot publicly. I talk about mentoring more, but that's really what discipleship is. Sometimes our Christian lingo gets in the way because we hear certain things so often that it loses significance to us because it's just stale to our ears. So discipleship is the biblical motif. It's the command given by Jesus to the church, the last command. I'm just using the word mentoring, to give a little fresh sound to it, but it's the same thing. We train Christians. And so what we're training them to be is ambassadors. And this is from 2 Corinthians 5:20. I believe, and that verse says, we, Paul says, are ambassadors for Christ, as though God were speaking through us, he says. So an ambassador is a representative of a sovereign, and to be a good ambassador, you have to know something. That's the message. That's a knowledge component. You have to navigate in conversation. We call that wisdom. That's a tactical element. And then you have to have the character that commends the message. I mean, if you know all this stuff and you're good in conversations, but you're kind of a jerk, people don't like you, well, people aren't going to listen. Not a good ambassador, all right? So the knowledge, wisdom, character is the threefold aspect of a good ambassador. And the way we characterize this at Stand to Reason is knowledge is an accurately informed mind. So we got to get the message right. Wisdom is an artful method. That's the tactical thing that we'll probably be talking about. And character is an attractive manner. So it sounds really nice with all that alliteration there, and it's memorable. I hope people are keeping that in mind because that's what we want. An accurately informed mind, an artful method, and an attractive manner. Knowledge, wisdom, character. And that's what we're after.
Wonderful. And then are there any persons in your own life who you think have embodied those distinct traits and have been especially inspirational or influential for you?
Yeah. Yes, in particular, I mentioned Craig Englert. He's a retired pastor now. He's just a little bit older than me, maybe a year or two, but he's retired. I'm still working. But he paid the price in many people's lives, but including mine. And I mentioned that set the trajectory for me early on. It was very, very important. And the application there is I hope those who are younger Christians will try to find older Christians that can be mentors for them. And what I mean is be not just teachers, but be friends in relationships, spending time with them. And so that all this stuff is rubbing off as they're spending time together, not just the straight ahead instruction, but all kinds of other things, like a parent does with a child. Okay. And that's the kind of relationship mentoring actually is, a parent-child kind of relationship. And Craig was a huge influence in my life. And then the rest of some of the other relationships were distant ones. Like I was deeply influenced by Francis Schaeffer, who he died in the 80s, but he wrote a few books that were, a number of them, but three were very influential. It's called the Schaeffer Trilogy. I don't need to give the titles because they're cumbersome for people to remember. If they just remember the Schaeffer Trilogy, they'll find them all together in one volume. But it really, really helped me understand some really important things about Christianity and how the message of Christianity applied to the world. So it helped me in evangelism. And I've been influenced even in the 10th anniversary edition of the Tactics book, I mentioned Francis Schaeffer, for example. And I also mentioned C.S. Lewis, who I think C.S. Lewis was kind of an alien from outer space, man. This guy, and was he Irish? I think he was Irish, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Yes, he was an Irishman, transplanted in England. But he was just there was no one like him. That's all I got to say. In his insight, his spirituality, his skill, his humility was so pervasive that people were astounded by it. I've read writings by people who knew him well, and it's just amazing. So he has influenced me tremendously. And then also J.P. Moreland. Now he's a person I know well. I've known him for 30 years now, and he was a mentor in a philosophy program for a master's degree that I had, and we've maintained contact ever since, and he's just been great. So he's influenced me a lot too. I told him, Jay, sometimes I don't know where you end and I begin, or whatever, And he said, don't worry about it. We all stand on the shoulders of those who came before us. So our theology in certain aspects is different, but there's been such a profound influence he's had on me. I just want to give him credit. So I think we all have people in our lives that are those giants upon whose shoulders we stand, And if we don't have those right now, we should be looking for them, either close by or maybe at a distance. I'm sure, Mark, there are people who count you as that person having an influence in their life. So,
God willing. Thanks for sharing that now, Greg. And I'd love to move on to look at some of your written work then. So one of the things that we mentioned there was tactics. So you've written a wonderful book, Tactics, a Game Plan for Discussing Your Christian Convictions. I want to ask you about that book, and what are some of the goals for success, and what is the importance of acting tactically in love, or what you call gardening before we harvest?
yes, right. Well, just for fun, I'm going to show the book. I'm a good marketer here as an author. Now, this little symbol at the top here shows that this is the 10th anniversary edition, and that's what your listeners want to get. I don't even think the other one's available anymore. This has 35% more material when I rewrote it about a year and a half ago. And it's been sitting at the top of the charts at Amazon in its category, evangelism, Christian evangelism, for a year and a half now. It's almost never booted out of number one. I'm very happy to see that because it shows that people are being influenced by it. I'm pushing 2,500 reviews now just on the 10th anniversary edition, and the average is 4.9 out of 5. So very satisfying for me. And I say that not to wave my flag, but to encourage people. That's helping other people. Maybe it'll help you too. Okay. especially in this edition, I develop a concept that is a predicate to the whole game plan or to evangelism in general. There is a way that we have been doing evangelism in the past that I think is not productive now. And because the way that we've been doing it principally focuses in on harvesting. And that is, when you harvest, you are getting a person to sign on the dotted line, essentially, right? You're getting that person to say, yes, I want Jesus. I'll pray the prayer. Okay, you prayed the prayer. Today's the 14th of July, 2021, and wow, that's your spiritual birthday. Well, there's nothing wrong with that. But what it does is it fixes our evangelistic attentions on the end of the game, which is the harvest. Now, if you were a farmer, you wouldn't walk out in the field and try to harvest. You'd have to do something else first. You'd have to plant, and then you'd have to cultivate, watering, fertilizing, caring until such time as the harvest is ready. And when the harvest is ripe, you don't need to be tugging on the fruit. It falls into the basket. Okay, I was just in Wisconsin a week and a half ago. My family has a place in the north woods, and the blueberries were just coming into season when we left. But there are a few bushes in our yard there in the woods that had really nice blueberries on it. And I would bend over to pick the blueberry, to pop it in my mouth, and that stinker would fall onto the ground, into the weeds, because if I just touched it, off it went. And so I had to really work hard to. Why? Because it was ripe. Ripe fruit falls off the vine. And this is why in the New Testament you do not see altar calls. You don't see people making the decision for Christ. It's just not there. You see the preachment of the gospel, and in the process, the Holy Spirit working. And when the fruit is ripe for harvest, according to God, that fruit falls into the basket. It's as simple as that. Now, I'm not against altar calls. I'm not putting that down. I'm just simply saying, if you have a evangelism mentality that's built on harvesting instead of on gardening, two things are going to happen. Only a small number of people are going to be in play. Only the people who are comfortable with going head to head and trying to yank fruit from the tree. All right? Most people aren't comfortable with that because that sounds like fighting words, right? So they're going to sit on the bench. Oh man, that's too much conflict for me, especially in our culture right now, Mark. So, and that was the second problem. The first one is the only people in play are going to be the obnoxious ones, the really aggressive ones. And the other thing is that a whole bunch of people aren't going to be participating. Yeah. And so here's what I tell people. This is a truism. Before there can be a harvest, there always has to be a season of gardening. Duh. Yeah. Before there can be a harvest, there always has to be a season of gardening. It's true in agriculture. It's true in evangelism. And by the way, this is very theologically sound. And all you have to do is go to John chapter 4, Jesus talking to the woman at the well. When he's done with that conversation, famous passage, right? And usually sermons are about that conversation, which there's a lot to sermonize about. But after she leaves and goes to Sychar, remember they were just outside of town at the well, his disciples, they aren't there. They're out getting food. They come back, and Jesus tells his disciples, you are about to reap where you did not sow. You are about to reap where you did not sow. So in other words, Jesus is identifying that one statement, a couple of things. First of all, there's one field. All right. In this case, it's Sychar. Secondly, there are two seasons, sowing, reaping, or gardening, harvesting. And there's two kinds of workers, sowers and reapers, gardeners and harvesters. All right. Now, Jesus is telling them, look, somebody else did the heavy lifting, gardening, but you're going to get the easy pickings, the harvest, right? And then he also makes a statement there, and it's all part of the passage, so that the one who reaps and the one who sows can rejoice together. Ooh, that's cool. That means that I want to really underline the implications here for a lot of people who are frustrated with evangelism because they think it has to be getting people to sign on the dotted line. And that's why they don't do it, because that sounds too difficult, scary, whatever. My conviction is that most Christians are not harvesters. Most Christians are gardeners.
Mm.
That's what I do. I garden. I tell audiences I haven't prayed to receive Christ with anyone for over 30 years. And I know what they're thinking, like, what a loser, right? But my life has never been more effective for the gospel's sake than it has been the last 30 years, because I see that as I garden, there is a harvest for the people I'm gardening down the line that I don't see. All right? How do I know that? Because they tell me. I was in your garden, is what they tell me. And then as you garden me, and some others did as well, then later on I became a Christian through some other means. The ripe fruit fell into the basket, and now they're followers of Jesus, and they attribute some of that to me as a gardener, which I'm thrilled. Okay? And what I want to do, and this is where the whole tactical game plan comes in, is I want to give tools for gardening. Because if the gardening is done well, the harvesting pretty much takes care of itself. And that's the way that all works together, Mark.
Wonderful. Yeah. Thank you, Greg. And I'd love to ask you about some of those tools then. So one example is the Colombo technique, which you mentioned.
Yes.
I want to ask you about that. And why is that important then for Christians to adopt such an approach?
So in the book, I have, the subtitle is called, is a game plan for discussing your Christian conviction. So we've got lots of different tactics that are tools of maneuvering, okay? They have names like Taking the Roof Off and Just the Facts, Ma'am, and Rhodes Scholar, and What a Friend We Have in Jesus, and Inside Out. They all have these names that help remind a person of how they can be used. But there is one tactic that is really the core of the game plan proper, and you mentioned the name of the tactic. I call it Colombo. And the namesake of the tactic is a character of American TV. Now, you're Irish. Now, I suspect, though, you know who I'm talking about.
Yeah.
You do. See, and look at, you're like a millennial or whatever, you're a young guy, I'm an old guy, and Colombo's from a long time ago, but his impact as a TV icon is durable, and it's international. So whether I'm in the UK or whether I'm in France or Hungary or Egypt or Italy or wherever I go and I teach on this, and those are all places I've taught, there are always people that know who Colombo is, okay? So he is a character in a murder mystery, and he is the lieutenant who solves the murders, and he shows up at the crime scene with a trench coat, London fog, actually, because I got one just like it from a thrift store, a secondhand store, and mine's a London fog. I look just like him, and I use it as a prop. And he's got a cigar that he carries with him. This is before the anti-smoking move in Hollywood, and so, and he comes in under the radar. So he arrives at the crime scene, and he's scratching his head, and he's muttering to himself. And honestly, this guy does not look like he can think his way out of a wet paper bag, which would be, I think, an Americanism there. I'm not sure if that resonates with. He looks stupid, right? But stupid like a fox. All right, that's kind of stupid because he's got a plan, and he uses questions to maneuver in conversation. And he comes in, as I say, under the radar, so he doesn't seem challenging. He's not scary. He's not a threat. And the way these murder mysteries work, you know who did the murder. That's up at front of, and that person is always part of the community there. Maybe a business relation or a husband or a wife. They're right there. They're all part of that, but they think they're going to get away with it because they're so slick. And this stupid detective, man, he's got nothing on them, right? But then he starts asking these questions and probing. And it's the use of questions then that allows him to accomplish the task, the clever use of questions. And that's the core of the Colombo game plan, the clever use of questions. Right?
Yeah, fantastic. And
I mean, there are details to it, but I'm just kind of introducing it here.
Yeah, excellent. And I want to ask you, just following that up then, Greg, what are some of the steps that we need to take to refine this tactic so that we're asking the relevant questions then?
Right. No, that's good. That's a good question. By the way, I just want to make an observation. Part of the power of using questions is it puts the person who is asking the questions in the driver's seat of the conversation. So let's just look at this interview here, okay? Let me ask you a question, Mark. Who's doing all the work here?
You're doing all the work.
I'm doing all the work. Who's in the driver's seat, though? Who is directing the conversation in the direction you want to go?
Yeah, that would be me.
That would be you. Okay, and how are you doing it? You're doing it by the questions you're asking here, okay? So notice even when I was making the point, I was asking questions of you to make my point I think a little bit more effectively than if I just said, I'm doing all the heavy lifting, you're not doing anything hardly, you're just asking questions, but you're in charge. No, that was the same thing. But because I used questions, even in that little instance, I was getting your cooperation here, and I think the point was made more effectively for your viewers. So that's kind of what we're after here. The questions create an interactive environment, but they allow the Christian to be in the driver's seat of the conversation while the other person is doing most of the work. Okay, and that's the goal of the tactical game plan. Now, the game plan itself has 3 different steps. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Very simple. All right. And the third step is a little bit more complex, and you don't even need to go there to begin initiating the game plan. All right. But the way I like to put it, here's the first step of the game plan. I do not want anybody thinking at the outset of a conversation that they hope will have a spiritual impact. I don't want anybody thinking about winning anyone to Christ. Forget about that. Why? Because that's the end game. You're not there yet. You know, if you're in I want to say a football game, but now here we've got, 2 great nations separated by a common language here. You know, you mean something different from football than I do. That was a Churchill quote. Let's just say American football, right? Super Bowl. When they start the Super Bowl, each team wants to win, but they're not thinking about the end of the game, because if they're thinking about the end of the game, they're not going to be able to perform adequately in the moment to be able to win in the end. They're thinking about what's going on right here. So that's what I want people to do. Don't worry about the end game. You don't know what that's going to be. You have no idea what God's going to do. You don't know anything about the circumstance, really, of the person you're talking to, especially if they're a stranger. And so what do you all I want you to do for the first step of the game plan is one thing: gather information. All you're going to do, gather information. You need, to use a military concept, you're going to need intel. You don't charge over, you charge over the hill with your AR blazing, when you don't know what's on the other side. That's still stupid. Silly, stupid, both. Instead, you want to figure out what's on the other side. How do you do that? Well, you wait. You gather intel. In this case, in a conversation, you're asking lots of questions just to find out the lay of the land. Okay. Now, there's a model question that I teach people to use at this point. And it's very flexible. That means it can be expressed in a lot of ways, but here's the simple notion. And that's the question: what do you mean by that? What do you mean by that? So if somebody says, well, Jesus never existed. Really? What do you mean? Well, I mean that there's a fable about Jesus, there's a myth about Jesus, but the man Jesus never existed. Now I got a little more information than I did before, first. And secondly, it gives me a breather. When he says, well, Jesus never existed, my first impulse as a Christian is, well, how can I prove him wrong? Well, now the pressure's on me. Now, I don't want that to be on me or any other Christian at this point in the conversation. I want to deflect that and give the Christian a little breathing room, an opportunity to think about where they're going to go. What do you mean by that? So what this question does is it tosses the ball in the other court. The Christian's still in the driver's seat, but it forces the other person to make their claim more clear, and it gives the Christian not only a breathing room, some time to think, but more information. And oftentimes the information has certain ambiguities in it, so you can ask the same question of the answer they have just given. And the whole idea is, you're not an automaton, but you're in a conversation really trying to understand the other person's point of view. And you want to let them talk as long as they can. Mm-hmm. Because I'm just going to say this from experience. The more that they talk about their view, characteristically, there's some exceptions to this, the more they talk about their own false view, if their view is false, the more they talk about it, the bigger the hole is that they're digging, that they're in. Okay?
Excellent. Yep.
So you just want to almost reflexively ask some form of the question, what do you mean by that? Now, when I say reflexively, I don't mean like an automaton, but I mean that should be a muscle memory. This is the first thing. So you hear all this stuff coming at you, okay? What do you say? You say, do you mind if I ask you a few questions? There it is, right there. It's easy to remember. You mind if I ask you a few questions? The minute you do that, you've changed the dynamic. Now you're in charge. No, I don't mind. What kind of questions? Well, I'm a little confused about your comment because it could mean a lot of different things, and I just want to get clear on your view. So when you see that Jesus never existed, what precisely are you getting at here? Now, it does seem like an obvious statement, Jesus never existed, but all right, never mind. Just let him talk about it more. All right. Now, the evidence does not support that notion, clearly. But maybe the Christian doesn't know all about that. I'm just saying, get in the shallow end of the pool. You don't need to know answers to do this, to be a student of another person's view. Why don't you start doing that? Now, here's the thing. And again, for your listeners and viewers who have not read the book or used some of the game plan that I'm beginning to describe here, you're not going to realize how powerful even the first step can be. Because I'll tell you, I have had many cases where I've just asked for clarification of a view, and this has had a salutary effect for me in the conversation. The person then has to think. And maybe they've never even thought about what they just said in any depth. And so now they're thinking about it. So, well, that's good. Well, And I had a waitress once. I can't give the whole conversation. And I'm wondering if this particular waitress story is in the book, because there's a number of them, but I don't think this one is, because I think it happened just after the book came out. The 10th anniversary edition came out. But it was in Seattle, and she was a New Age person. New Age people say a lot of things that are really confusing. It's hard to figure out what they're saying. And so I'm at the table there, at in a hotel. I'm just about ready to leave and she's spouting this stuff up. And I said, I'm not sure I understand what you mean. Could you explain that? Oh, blah, 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 blah. I said, well, I'm still confused. This thing you said. So I keep asking her questions about her view. She comes back to me a little later. And I actually, to be honest, didn't want to even talk about spiritual things. It was early in the morning. I'm not a morning person. I just wanted to be left alone. She was way too cheerful for that time of the morning. In any event, though, so I kept asking these questions. I wasn't even trying to do the game plan. Like I said, it's kind of reflexive for me. What? Wait, you said the universe takes care of you? Is the universe a person? No. Well, then how does the universe take care of you? Yeah, well, I mean, God takes care of you. Oh, okay, God takes care of you. Okay, now I get it. Well, God is the universe. God is the universe? Really? What is that? I don't get that. That was the conversation. And on it went. Finally, she tired of chatting and she moved on with the coffee to somebody else. And I was left alone with my coffee so I could wake up completely. But later she came back. And she said to me, no one has ever asked me questions about my view before. And it got me thinking. That's what she said. Mm. Now, I said, short on time, I actually was going to be preaching at a church locally. And as I left the hotel, I was getting picked up to go to that church and then get on a plane to fly back to L.A. And I said, well, if we had more time, I could ask more questions and you could do more thinking, is what I said to her. I did leave a book behind. She was happy to get it, The Story of Reality. It's a book I wrote, and she was thrilled to get a book that I wrote, and I signed it. And so I suspect she's reading it. But notice what happened. All I did was ask a few questions for clarification's sake, and the questions themselves got her thinking, and that's what I'm after. I just want to get people thinking. I want to, like I say, put a stone in their shoe. I want to kind of annoy them a little bit, but in a good way. Okay, so there's an example of me just using that question to get information. I am not witnessing. I don't even want to witness. I didn't want to witness. But I was asking those questions, and God used it to get that person thinking about their own view and the intelligibility of it. So that's just a very real life example of the kind of thing that's going to happen if your viewers simply get into the shallow end of the pool and stay there for a while and merely ask about other people's views. When they do that, as I just suggested, they're going to have an impact. God's going to do stuff in many cases, but they're also going to learn two things. They're going to learn, first of all, that other people aren't as scary as they thought. And by the way, these two things I'm giving you because another woman who we sent out on campus after training her told me this, and it does capture the truth of the matter. She said, I went out there and I realized they're not as scary as I thought. When you start engaging people and drawing them out, you are personalizing it. You don't treat them as objects. Now they're people, and it changes things. Secondly, she said, they're not as smart as I thought, too. Right? So sometimes we overestimate the opposition. And anyway, that's something that will get people going. It's just the first step, and there's two others, but that's the first step of the game plan.
Fantastic. Thank you, Greg. And I think those things are timeless. They're going to be relevant for ages and ages.
Absolutely.
However, I should say, however, that I think it's even more prescient in this very relativistic age, and absolute relativism, we might even call it. And I think that's fully demonstrable in your debate you had with that famous Indian Deepak Chopra.
Deepak Chopra, yeah.
Where you asked him all these questions, which made him kind of commit the suicide.
Yeah, right. He did not. He was not a happy camper as at the end of that interview. That's true.
Can you tell us a bit about that, the suicide tactic that you referred to in the book, then, Greg, and how does that sort of help us see through the phony relativism that
right.
come up with?
Well, the suicide tactic, in some ways, nowadays, I guess it's a little bit of an unfortunate label because suicide is a serious problem in our culture, especially with young people. I imagine you're facing something similar in yours. Nevertheless, it's the name of the tactic because some ideas commit suicide. These are classically known as self-refuting ideas or arguments, if you will. So if somebody says to you, for example, I cannot speak a single word in English, you're thinking, wait a minute, that sounded to me like English, or at least a Yanks variation of it, you know. And so notice that when I make the statement, my making the statement proves the statement itself to be false. Or I said there are no English sentences that are longer than 3 words. You think, wait a minute, wasn't that an English sentence? Yeah. Isn't that longer than 3 years? Yeah. Well, then that's false. So the nature of self-refuting statements are that if you say them, they render themselves false automatically. All right? They commit suicide, if you will, self-destruct. And all we have to do is to listen and pay attention. Now, the classic example of this is when someone says, and this is the view of lots of people nowadays, especially in the university, which is an odd place for this view to be, because the view is that there is no truth. All right? You hear it all the time. Why is this out at the university? Because aren't we paying these people a lot of money to teach us the truth? And then they tell me there is no such thing, there's none of that stuff. Well, then give me my money back, you know, kind of thing. But the reason this is self-refuting is the statement there is no truth is spoken by people who presume that the statement is what? True. Right? Okay. And so for me, I would use a question to expose the flaw. I won't just simply say, you say there's no truth? Well, that's self-refuting. You think that's true, and that's contradictory. Well, that would be an accurate way of pointing out the error, but it wouldn't be very tactful. It wouldn't be very elegant. So the way I might role play that, if somebody says, well, there is no truth, I would ask for clarification, first step. Then I'd want to know, help me understand here, this is actually the third use of Colombo, which is I'm using my questions to make a point. All right. We jumped over the second use. Maybe we'll get to that. But the third use, now I realize this is a problem. This is a self-refuting statement. So I'm going to exploit the problem by using questions. So I'm going to say, well, are you intending that I'm confused here. What do you mean? Well, I'm not sure what to do with your statement. What do you mean? Well, I think you want me to believe it. Of course I want you to believe it. That's why I told you. So in other words, you want me to think that the statement you just made is actually accurate. Yes. In other words, it's true. Yes, of course. You want me to believe your statement is true. Yes, but the statement is that there is no truth. What am I supposed to do with that? So notice how I use the questions to build to the point of helping that person see that their view is self-refuting. But now I'm using them in the conversation. I'm not lecturing at them. I'm help dig the hole deeper. So he's not going to get out of this hole. In fact, this hole is pretty deep all by itself. Self-refutation is you can't get out of that. Okay, but what I'm doing as a tactician now is trying to help that person to see the mistake they've just made. So that's a classic example of the suicide tactic. Now, what happened in the interview with Deepak Chopra, and this is on, excuse me, YouTube. Pardon me. You can go online and find it somewhere. Chopra and Koukl, and I think the whole thing is there. But and I look younger, and I have less gray, but he looks younger too. Until the end of the interview, then he looks pretty haggard. But part of what I traded on there was the suicide tactic, because he was faulting me as a Christian for believing that my way was the right way. Okay? Jesus is the only way of salvation. Now, he respected Jesus. And I didn't use this tactic on him, which I now call What a Friend We Have in Jesus, and it's in the new edition. But I could have said, listen, you don't like that view? That was Jesus' view. It's not my view. So you disagree with Jesus? Are you saying you disagree with Jesus' claim about himself? Oh, well, he never made, I don't know how he'd respond. I didn't go that way, but I could have. All right. Instead, I pointed out that he's attacking me based on my view that I think it's correct, when in fact he has an alternate view that he thinks is correct. In fact, it's the basis for him correcting me. He's right and I'm wrong, but he's faulting me for saying that I'm right and he's wrong. All right, so that is a practical suicide situation. All right, and here's the irony, Mark. And Deepak Chopra, he's a strong marketer. All right, so he sells lots of books. At the time, he had sold 20 million books. That's a lot. Mm-hmm. All right, I don't even have 5% of that in my whole writing career. But in any event, this is what I said to him. You sold a lot of books, right? Yeah, 20 million. So, he's digging his hole deeper. Okay, are you selling books saying that what you believe is actually wrong? Well, of course not. So that was the tack that I took with him. Now, here's the irony, though. He was promoting a book at that time. And I wish I had it in my lap, because we were both in sound stages at different ends of the country. All right. And so I had black curtains all around me. I'm looking into a camera. Okay. But I wish I had in my lap the book he was promoting. I could have held it up. I'll just use my own book as an example and said, but look at the title of the book you're promoting. What was the title of his book? Love is the Way. Yeah. Now, maybe he's right. Maybe love is the way. But notice he's saying that his way is the right way. Mm-hmm. What's that? That's suicide. And so that was I did exploit that concern in the interview, even though I did not. It would have been a cherry on the top of the cake for me if I had held up his book. But it was pretty evident, even without that maneuver, which would have been entirely legitimate, that he was in a self-refuting situation. He's faulting me for thinking I'm right, and he's countering with what he thinks he's right. So wait a minute. The problem is, of course, there's nothing wrong with somebody thinking they're right. That's not arrogant just because they think they're right. Everybody thinks they're right in what they believe. They may not know they're right, but they all think they're right. That's why they believe what they believe. Mm-hmm. Duh.
I think building upon that too, Greg, there seems to be now this shadow side of that squishy postmodernism, and people are becoming more aggressive, which I'd love to talk to you about, especially between the things like critical theory. But at the personal level, then I want to ask you about more aggressive debaters and the steamroller tactic, and what are some of the best responses you found to more aggressive debaters then?
Well, aggressive, I have a tactic called steamroller, and that is for aggressive people. They're not necessarily postmoderns. I mean, postmoderns can be aggressive, and you have a very, very aggressive element in the cultural discussion right now, excessively aggressive. In fact, so aggressive that it's not possible in many cases to have a conversation with them. And this is where the tactic comes in. The steamroller tactic gives, it's a defensive tactic, and it gives the Christian a tool to deal with somebody coming on really, really strong. Now, the defining characteristic of a steamroller, you can just picture in your mind a steamroller so you know the kind of person I'm talking about. They're just bowling over the top of you, okay, with attitude and noise and especially interruption. So interruption is the characteristic of a steamroller. Okay, so they challenge you on something, and you're trying to respond, and you get 3 or 4 words into a sentence, and bang, they interrupt, and they take you in another direction, and then they interrupt you again, and so you can't get anywhere. You're thinking, and will you just shut up and let me answer? But of course, that response would not be a good character response of an ambassador, right? So we have to be careful to manage. And so what I put together is a 3-step means of addressing and managing steamrollers, all right? And so the first step is actually quite simple. It's just you pause and you stop the conversation gently and amicably in a friendly way, and you ask for equal time. Okay, and notice I put my hand up there as a little body English, so to speak. I'm not always sure whether I'm using like a Yank Americanisms kind of thing, and whether we say when you do this stuff with your body, you fake. That's called body English, and I don't know, but maybe in your country you say it's body Irish. I don't know, but so you don't give the credit to the English or something. I don't know, but I think you get my point. So you just put your hand up a little bit. You say, "Hold on, I'm not quite finished yet." So if it were you, Mark, that was jumping in, I say, "Hold on, Mark, I'm not. Can I have a second just to finish my point?" And then I'll let you back in. Okay, notice that's a very, very quick and mild negotiation, and I am not showing annoyance. Okay, I'm not bugged at the person. Generally speaking, when I say, hold on, let me just finish. I'll let you in a minute. I'll give you a chance. Then what we do is that person gives us the opportunity to finish our thought, and then we give the floor back to them so they can respond to what we have to say. So it's a give and take. Remember, these people are like, they want to get into it, and they also tend to be controlling and manipulative, the more aggressive ones. Okay, they actually don't want to give you a chance to speak your mind. This is especially true nowadays. They have no interest in giving you fair play. All right, this is where the whole idea of like a give and take and freedom of speech and all that is now largely out the window in America. 50%. According to recent polls, of college students do not believe in freedom of speech. Now, as it turns out, they are 100% in favor of freedom of speech for themselves, but not for opposing views. Okay, so that's quite self-serving, but this is tough. All right, so you run into these kind of people. So you got to ask for as an act of courtesy. Okay, now lots of times that we'll deal with it, and the people then will fall into a rhythm of give and take. And if they get a little aggressive again, you could just do the same thing. Oh, remember, you said I would be able to, answer. You want an answer, right? Sure. Okay. This will take a few moments, so it requires you got to be patient. Is that all right with you? So you're verbally trying to get their agreement. Okay, to cooperate. Now, it turns out in many cases or in some cases, in the minority of cases, people are going to break trust with you. They're going to break their agreement, and they'll keep coming on, bang, 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 bang. Now, so the first one, you stop them, if the way I described, that works. The second step is to shame them. Shame them, okay? And the way you do that is basically do the same thing you just did, but a little more aggressively and specifically addressing the lack of courtesy in their way of responding. So I might say something, okay, well, hold on just a minute, Mark. Can I say something for a second? You ask questions, and I get the feeling, well, you sound like you want an answer, but I get the feeling you don't care about the answer. You just want to bowl me over and keep talking, so you keep interrupting. So I need to know if you really want an answer or you just want to talk and tell me your side. If you want to talk, tell me your side, I'll listen. But if you really want an answer, you're going to have to let me respond. And after I'm done talking, I will be polite to you and listen to you, what you have to say. Is that okay with you? Now, that's a little more aggressive, isn't it? Because I'm essentially accusing them of being impolite, and that's the shaming part. But it's appropriate as a second step because the first step got ignored. So first you stop them. If that doesn't work, then you shame them in the way I described. And the details are in the book. I have model conversations so you really get a sense of it. What if that doesn't work? First you stop them, then you shame them, then you leave them. Okay? You will not engage with a person who is going to has no desire for conversation but just wants to steamroll over the top of you. You let them have the last word. You say, okay, I understand your point. Obviously, this is not a good opportunity for a give and take conversation. We're just going to leave it at that. And off you go. Now, when I say leave them, if the steamroller is your husband or your wife, you're just leaving the conversation. You're not leaving the relationship, okay? Though that may seem appealing at the moment. So that's the general way of dealing with steamrollers, and there's a lot more steamrollers nowadays than there used to be, just because the political left, I'll just label it because I think it's accurate, is much more shrill than they ever have been, and they have very little interest in fair play. They just want to. They have a totalitarian impulse, which means they want to overwhelm you, just with the force of their voice and personalities or whatever. So it's an unfortunate situation because it's not healthy for our communities, but it is what is happening at the moment in both of our cultures, both sides of the pond, so to speak.
Unfortunately so. And I think in line with that, I wanted to ask you then, which I think is especially important and coming from my background as a teacher, how might we then inculcate some of these tactics in our children, especially when schools really ramp up this brainwashing, which I think we see in the teaching of dubious gender ideology, critical race theory, things like that, black and white moralistic framework, new religion coming in.
Well, this is where the first step of Colombo is really, really important because training children who are sympathetic to they share your convictions. They know they're going out into a tough situation. Asking the question, what do you mean by that, is one of the most powerful tools. And it's not hard to teach a student, a young person. Adults, parents, characteristically encourage their kids to be polite in conversations and draw another person out with questions. So interested is interesting, the saying goes. And so, and I think UK folk in general are quite polite. I've been to the UK, I've not been to Ireland, but I've been to England, I think 4 times. And I don't think I ever had an encounter with an impolite person ever. You know, I'm sure that people who live there have had that, but I just think you're a polite society, and characteristically much more than Americans, who tend to be a bit brash by UK standards, I think. But I think that teaching our children to ask questions and draw those people out is a standard part of being polite. Okay, but if we teach them that part of what we want you to do is be tactically minded here. So when somebody says, well, I feel like I'm a woman in a man's body, we can ask them what they mean by that. That used to be an incoherent statement. That used to be a statement that if you said it, it would be like talking, I feel like I'm a square circle. Wait a minute, how could you be a square circle? How can you be a woman in a man's body? Especially, by the way, if you don't believe in a soul. If you don't believe in a soul, all you've got is a body. But that's a good clarification question under that circumstance, by the way. Do you believe in the soul? You know? Oh, do you have a soul? You are a soul? Because if you don't have a soul, that statement makes no sense. How could you be different than what your body is if all you are is your body? But having a soul, that's part of a Christian worldview. It is not part of an atheistic worldview. So if an atheist is saying I'm a woman in a man's body, doesn't make sense. And so I could ask questions about the coherence of that statement. So in a certain sense, to answer your question specifically, Mark, what we teach our children is nothing different than what we would practice ourselves. This way of approaching people and dealing in conversations with challenges is so universal. It doesn't matter how old you are. It doesn't matter what your cultural circumstance is. It doesn't matter where in the world you are. It doesn't matter what time of history you're in. It still works because it trades on very fundamental things that are tied to the nature of reality and the nature of human nature itself. And they aren't tied to a specific clever maneuver that works in this culture at this time.
I'm thoroughly enjoying this conversation, Greg, and I'd love to continue it, but I know you have to go this evening. So just to close up for this part of the conversation, if we might take it in the future, perhaps talk about the story of reality and your
Sure.
other wonderful work. I wanted to ask you then, again, where can the viewers or listeners find out more about you and your work, just building this
Sure.
conversation?
Yeah, well, the simple place to go to is our website. The organization that I serve is called Stand to Reason. The acronym is STR. So the URL is str.org. Very, very simple. They can try Googling my name if they want, but it's not the easiest name to spell. And but if you go to STR, just type in Stand to Reason, you'll find our stuff. And on our website, we have thousands and thousands of pieces and articles and videos and all kinds of fun things that will educate, I think, in a clever way. We have a new feature, by the way, called Red Pen Logic. And I won't say a lot about it. It's just 5 to 7 minute vignettes. They're short and they're fun. And Tim Barnett, Canadian, so he's kind of kin to you guys very broadly in Ontario. He's on our team. He takes a meme that is hostile to Christianity and he red pens it like a teacher would because he used to be a teacher. And then he gives a 5 to 7 minute video explanation of what he's just done. And so there are graphics involved. They're lots and lots of fun. Okay. And but they're very good tools to teach about not only answering the challenge, which Christians may not know how to answer that challenge, but they also are very good tools to learn how to think more carefully. So it's called Red Pen Logic. Open up your browser, go to YouTube, and just type it in. You'll get it just like that. And watch a few episodes. They're a lot of fun. So these are the kinds of things that we are doing to make learning accessible to all sorts of people so they can be more effective ambassadors for Christ. str.org. And plus, I encourage people to think about, if they listen to your show, then maybe they'd want to listen to mine. So I do 2 hours by myself a week, and then I do another 2 half-hour shows with Amy Hall, and we're answering questions there too. It's called #STRask. And so these are all available on our website. You can find that stuff there.
Wonderful. Thank God for that. And thank you so much for joining me today, Greg. It's been such a pleasure to talk to you, and God bless you.
Oh, thank you. It's been a pleasure talking with you, Mark, and someday hopefully we'll be able to meet in Ireland, God willing.